Okay, hey guys, I'm back with part two. So we're going to start off with Days Without End by Sebastian Barry. Okay, now, you didn't heard quite a lot about that on book two because everybody's talking about it, I think. Sebastian Barry is supposed to be known for being a wonderful writer and a good storyteller. So Days Without End, I think it won a literary award, but I can't remember which one it is right now. But it was a two-time finalist for the Man Booker. So this particular story, Days Without End, it says Thomas McNulty, aged barely 17 and having fled the Great Famine in Ireland, signs up for the U.S. Army in the 1850s. With his brothers in arms, John Cole, Thomas goes on to fight in the Indian Wars against the Sioux and the Yurok, and ultimately the Civil War. Orphans of terrible hardships themselves, the men find these days to be vivid and alive despite the horrors they see and are complicit in. Moving from the plains of Wyoming to Tennessee, Sebastian Barry's latest work is a masterpiece of atmosphere and language. An intensely poignant story of two men and the makeshift family they create with a young Sioux girl, Winona. Days Without End is a fresh and haunting portrait of the most fateful years in American history and is a novel never to be forgotten. Yeah, okay, sounds really, really good. So this is one that has been on my list for a while. So if that gets picked, yes. Okay. Next on the list, we have The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, which is by Arundhati Roy. And Arundhati Roy wrote The God of Small Things. And that is a book that is constantly recommended to me by lots of people. In specific, Camel from Camel Reads. Camel has been recommending me this one, and I have not read it yet, so I need to get on it. So actually I have that book on my list to read this year, so hopefully I'll get to a chance to get to it. There's so many good books to get to at this point. So The Ministry of Utmost Happiness transports us across the subcontinent on a journey of many years. It takes us deep into the lives of its gloriously rendered characters, each of them in search of a place of safety, in searching of meaning and of love. In a graveyard outside the walls of Old Delhi, a resident unrolls a threadbare Persian carpet on a concrete sidewalk. A baby suddenly appears just after midnight. In a snowy valley, a bereaved father writes a letter to his 5-year-old daughter about the people who came to her funeral. In a second-floor apartment, a lone woman chain smokes as she reads through her old notebooks. At the Jonet guest house, two people who have known each other all their lives sleep with their arms wrapped around each other as though they have just met. Okay, so you can see it feels like it's going to have a nice poetic feel, but it's probably going to be intense, and it is literary fiction. So everything I like. Hopefully it will get picked, but I don't think so. I don't think people will pick it, but I would love to read it. Okay, next on the list, we have Stranger Than We Can Imagine, Making Sense of the 20th Century. All right, now, I spoke to Britta Bowler about this particular book, and she said she had it on her TBR, and she said, that's a weird book to suggest for a book club. I hadn't looked it up, so I didn't really know what it was about. But then when she told me that it involved lots of different things like, postmodernism and cubism and, plenty of other things, which I will read in a minute, I thought, wow, this is going to be a tough one maybe for people to want to read, because if you don't know, for example, I don't know anything about quantum mechanics, and I don't really care. But I would guess I would need to know something about quantum mechanics if he's going to talk to me about quantum mechanics. So you see the catch-22 with this one. Just to be clear, it says, in Stranger Than We Can Imagine, John Higgs argues that before 1900, history seemed to make sense. We can understand innovations like electricity, culture, agriculture, and democracy. The 20th century, in contrast, gave us relativity, cubism, quantum mechanics, the id, existentialism, Stalin, psychedelics, chaos, mathematics, climate change, and postmodernism. In order to understand such a disorientating barrage of unfamiliar and naughty ideas, Higgs shows us we need to shift the framework of our interpretation and view these concepts within the context of a new kind of historical narrative. Nah, not for me personally. Nah, brah, I don't want to do it. So, moving on, we have our next book, which it's called A Whole Life by Robert Seethaler. And he is a German writer. I have not read anything by him. As far as this book goes, it doesn't really say what it's about. It just has something like it's about the relationship between a man and a landscape. I have no idea. All I know is it almost has 4 stars on Goodreads. And there's somebody that I follow on Goodreads. She's a blogger. And I trust her opinion. And she gave it 5 stars, A Whole Life. So, I don't really know. If you've read it, let me know if I should even bother. Or if you don't think it would be for me, then tell me I don't think it'd be for you. All right. Next, we have the famous Hidden Figures. You all know that. I read it last year. Loved it, loved it, loved it. I saw the movie. Wasn't so over the moon about the movie, but it wasn't bad. It was just that it wasn't like the book. It just took a few aspects out of the book and put it into a movie. But if you haven't read the book, I suggest you read it because it does give you a good insight on where NASA came from, like what were their relationships, racial relationships, and just how they change. And it's really interesting to read. And I think Margot Lee Setterly did a very good job on it. So that was on the list. But, if it gets on again, I'll probably skim it, read it again. All right. And then we have, for the last one on this video, we have When Breath Becomes Air. You've heard people talking about this book. It has been all over BookTube. It's Paul Kalanithi. He was a doctor who was suffering from stage 4 lung cancer. And he wrote this book. One day he was a doctor making a living treating the dying. And the next he was a patient struggling to live. So I think, I've heard a lot of people talk about this particular book. But for some reason, I am not interested in reading this book. But, if it gets picked, I guess I'll have to bite the bullet and read it. But I've heard enough people talk about it. I've heard enough people rave about it. And I've not heard very many people who said they didn't like it, probably because they're afraid to say they don't like it because everybody else liked it. So that's that for the second video. I'll be coming back with you with a third video with the rest of the list. Stay tuned.